Welcome to Warriors of the World, where the stories of legendary leaders come alive. Today, we journey to 13th century Scotland to meet William Wallace, a man whose life and legacy have transcended time, making him a symbol of resistance and freedom. Picture the mist-covered valleys and rugged mountains of Scotland, where every stone and river seems to echo the whispers of the past. It was in this harsh yet beautiful land that William Wallace was born around 1270, during a time when Scotland was under England's oppressive shadow. King Edward I, known as the Hammer of the Scots, had brought Scotland to its knees, imposing his rule and threatening its culture and autonomy. Wallace grew up in a world defined by this tension. Though details of his early life are scarce, we know he came from a minor noble family, affording him an education few enjoyed at the time. William wasn't just a warrior, he was a cultured man, fluent in Latin and skilled in leadership, qualities that would soon set him apart. What transformed this young Scotsman into a leader was a personal tragedy. According to chronicles, his wife was killed by English soldiers, igniting an unquenchable fire within him and a determination to avenge his people. For Wallace, the fight wasn't just about revenge, it was about restoring Scotland's dignity and freedom. As English oppression grew, Wallace emerged as a key figure in the Scottish resistance. He wasn't just a military leader, but an inspiration to the farmers and warriors who found newfound hope under his banner. In this first chapter, we've seen the birth of a hero. In the next, we'll delve into how Wallace defied the English Empire and how the Battle of Stirling Bridge marked the beginning of his legend. In 1297, the Scottish resistance, led by William Wallace and Andrew de Moray, faced its first major test, the Battle of Stirling Bridge. This historic moment marked a turning point in Scotland's fight for freedom, proving that even a small army could defeat an empire when guided by strategy and courage. The English, confident in their superior numbers and weaponry, sent an army of around 10,000 men to crush the Scots. Wallace, with barely 6,000 fighters, knew brute force wasn't enough to win. But what he lacked in numbers, he made up for in ingenuity. Stirling Bridge, a narrow crossing over the River Forth, became the centerpiece of his strategy. Wallace patiently waited for the English to begin crossing, knowing the bridge could only hold a limited number of soldiers at once. When about half the English army had crossed, Wallace ordered his men to attack. The Scots charged with a ferocity that caught the English completely off guard. On the narrow terrain, the heavily armored English knights and soldiers couldn't maneuver effectively, while the Scots, armed with long spears and lighter armor, pressed the attack relentlessly. The English were driven back into the river, where many drowned trying to escape. The victory at Stirling was more than a military achievement, it was a morale-shattering blow to the English Empire. For the first time in years, Scotland had a real hope of liberation. Wallace emerged as Scotland's guardian, a leader who not only fought for his people but inspired them to believe in a brighter future. In the next chapter, we'll follow Wallace as he continued his fight, taking the resistance deep into England's heart and challenging Edward I himself. The victory at Stirling established William Wallace as the undisputed leader of the Scottish resistance. Shortly after the battle, he was named Guardian of Scotland, a title symbolizing his role as the nation's defender against English occupation. However, with this honor came enormous responsibility, keeping Scotland's fight for freedom alive amid relentless internal and external challenges. Wallace was not a king, but his charisma, bravery, and strategic prowess granted him authority few could question. Under his leadership, the Scottish forces grew, recruiting peasants, clans, and nobles who had previously hesitated to join the cause. While tensions among Scotland's leaders didn't completely disappear, Wallace became the face of a movement that transcended local divisions. Emboldened by the victory at Stirling, Wallace carried the fight into English territory, launching raids into northern England. These incursions not only weakened English control but sent a clear message: Scotland would not bow without a fight. Every village burned and garrison destroyed strengthened Scottish resolve and undermined English morale. But war was not a series of easy victories. Wallace faced an enemy with seemingly endless resources and troops. King Edward I, known for his cunning and brutality, quickly reorganized his army to retaliate. At the same time, Wallace had to contend with internal disputes among Scottish nobles, some of whom preferred negotiating with England over continuing the fight. Despite these challenges, Wallace remained steadfast. His actions were not just military maneuvers but also symbols of inspiration. Every victory, no matter how small, bolstered the Scottish cause and proved that even an empire's power could be challenged. In the next chapter, we'll explore how Wallace's determination led to his confrontation with Edward I's army at the fateful Battle of Falkirk, where the forces of freedom faced their greatest test. In 1298, less than a year after the victory at Stirling, William Wallace faced his greatest challenge, the Battle of Falkirk. This clash not only tested his leadership and strategy but also exposed the limitations of a disadvantaged Scottish army against Edward I's military machine. Determined to crush the Scottish resistance, Edward assembled a massive force of longbowmen, heavy cavalry, and well-trained infantry. Wallace, commanding a significantly smaller army, knew the odds were stacked against him. Still, he chose the field at Falkirk to make his stand, trusting in the discipline and bravery of his troops. Wallace organized his men into schiltrons, circular spear formations designed to repel English cavalry charges. This tactic, successful in previous battles, relied on coordination and strong flanking support. However, the overwhelming power of the English longbowmen changed the course of the battle. Arrows rained down on the schiltrons, causing devastating casualties and weakening their defenses before the English cavalry charged. Despite the slaughter, the Scots fought with a bravery that left an indelible mark. Wallace, seeing the battle was lost, managed to withdraw with the surviving forces, knowing the fight was far from over. While Falkirk was a tactical defeat, it was not the end of Scotland's cause. The loss at Falkirk was a devastating blow for Wallace, who stepped down as Guardian of Scotland shortly afterward. Yet his spirit remained unbroken. He continued to fight as a rebel leader, keeping the resistance alive and proving that Scotland's freedom did not depend on a single battle but on the determination of its people. In the next chapter, we'll delve into how Wallace, even after Falkirk, remained a thorn in England's side and how his eventual capture and execution marked the beginning of his immortality as a symbol of freedom. After the defeat at Falkirk, William Wallace continued to lead the Scottish resistance from the shadows. Without the unified support of Scotland's nobles, his fight became even more difficult, but his resolve never wavered. For years, he carried out raids and guerrilla attacks against English forces, keeping the flame of freedom alive. However, his path to immortality was marked by betrayal and sacrifice. In 1305, Wallace was betrayed by a fellow Scotsman, Sir John de Menteith, who handed him over to the English for a reward. Captured near Glasgow, Wallace was taken to London in chains, not as an ordinary prisoner, but as a political trophy for King Edward I. For Edward, capturing Wallace was more than a military victory. It was an opportunity to demonstrate his power and crush any remaining hopes of rebellion in Scotland. The journey to London was a humiliation. Wallace was paraded as a criminal and treated with contempt, but he never showed fear or regret. Even in captivity, he remained steadfast in his conviction that the fight for Scotland's freedom was just. To the Scottish people, Wallace became a martyr even before his death, a living symbol of resistance against oppression. Wallace's capture did not mark the end of Scotland's fight for independence. Instead, his example inspired new generations of fighters, including Robert the Bruce, who would take up the cause and eventually lead Scotland to victory at the Battle of Bannockburn years later. In the next chapter, we'll explore Wallace's trial and execution, a tragic moment that sealed his place in history as an immortal hero and a universal symbol of freedom. In August 1305, William Wallace was brought before the English court in London, charged with high treason against King Edward I. However, Wallace responded with a statement that would echo through the ages. "I could not be a traitor, for I never swore allegiance to Edward." These simple but powerful words captured the essence of his struggle. Scotland was a free nation, and he was its defender. The trial was a farce. Wallace had no chance to defend himself, and his fate was already sealed. He was sentenced to death in the most brutal way imaginable, an attempt not only to punish him but to send a message to the Scottish people. Yet, instead of breaking his legacy, this act of cruelty cemented it. On August 23, 1305, Wallace was executed at Smithfield in London. He was hanged, drawn, and quartered, a punishment reserved for traitors. His remains were displayed in different parts of England as a warning to other rebels. But to Scotland and the world, this act was not an end, it was the beginning of his immortality. Wallace's death further ignited the flame of resistance in Scotland. His sacrifice became a rallying cry for those who continued to fight for freedom. Inspired by Wallace's example, Robert the Bruce would eventually lead the Scots to a decisive victory against England, securing Scotland's independence at the Battle of Bannockburn in 1314. Today, Wallace is remembered not only for his bravery but for his unwavering dedication to freedom. His story has transcended borders, inspiring resistance and liberation movements worldwide. His implicit motto, "Every man dies, but not every man truly lives," remains a reminder that the fight for what is right is always worth it. In the next chapter, we'll reflect on Wallace's cultural and philosophical impact, from his influence on modern Scotland to his enduring place in popular culture. The legacy of William Wallace didn't die with his execution. His sacrifice not only inspired Robert the Bruce's fight and the eventual victory at Bannockburn, but also left a profound mark on Scotland's cultural identity. Wallace became a symbol of the indomitable Scottish spirit, a beacon for generations seeking inspiration in resistance and freedom. In the centuries following his death, Wallace was celebrated in poems, songs, and popular legends. Scottish bards recounted his exploits in taverns and castles, ensuring that his story lived on in the collective memory. In the 15th century, the Wallace, an epic poem by Blind Harry, solidified his place in history. While the poem blends fact and fiction, it captured the essence of Wallace as the champion of the oppressed. In modern Scotland, Wallace's name echoes everywhere. From imposing monuments like the Wallace Monument in Stirling, which offers a breathtaking view of the battlefield where he fought, to his image being used in independence movements, Wallace remains a symbol of the fight for self-determination. The word freedom, eternally associated with Wallace, represents not only his cause but also the universal right to resist oppression. His legacy extends beyond Scotland, inspiring movements for liberty and justice worldwide. In many ways, Wallace ceased to be just a man. He became an ideal, a symbol of resistance against tyranny. In the next chapter, we'll explore how Wallace transformed into a universal figure and how his story has been adapted and reimagined in popular culture, from iconic films to contemporary movements. William Wallace's story has transcended borders and centuries, finding a permanent place in popular culture and in the hearts of those who fight for freedom. His most well-known portrayal came with the film Braveheart, 1995, directed by and starring Mel Gibson. While the film takes many historical liberties, it captured the essence of Wallace's sacrifice and introduced his story to a global audience. Wallace's cry of freedom at the film's climax became one of the most iconic scenes in cinematic history. For many, this phrase encapsulates his struggle and sacrifice, resonating with people of all ages and cultures. Yet, Wallace's influence isn't limited to cinema. His name and legacy have been invoked in political speeches, independence movements, and debates about justice and human rights. In Scotland, Wallace remains central to the narrative of independence. During recent referendums on leaving the United Kingdom, his spirit was evoked as a symbol of resistance against external domination. Even in international contexts, leaders of resistance movements have cited Wallace as a source of inspiration. But Wallace isn't just a political or historical figure. He is a reminder that freedom always comes at a price, and true heroism lies in being willing to sacrifice everything for a greater cause. This ideal makes him a universal icon, transcending geographical and cultural divides. Thanks to his representation in books, video games, and films, William Wallace lives on in the collective imagination. His story doesn't belong solely to the past, but continues to inspire new generations to fight for their rights and ideals. In the next chapter, we'll reflect on Wallace's eternal impact and how his legacy remains relevant in a world still grappling with struggles for freedom and justice. The story of William Wallace is not just about a man who fought for his people's freedom. It's about a symbol that transcended borders and generations. His legacy goes beyond battles and military strategies. Wallace represents an ideal, standing against oppression even when the odds seem insurmountable. In Scotland, Wallace is more than a historical figure. His name is etched in monuments like the towering Wallace Monument in Stirling, which continues to draw visitors from around the world. But his influence is not confined to his homeland. His story has been a beacon for resistance movements across the globe, inspiring leaders who fought colonial powers and activists seeking justice and human rights. What makes Wallace so special is the universality of his message. His struggle was not just for Scotland. It was for dignity, freedom, and the idea that the powerful cannot subdue the weak without facing the united resistance of a people. Every generation finds in his sacrifice a reminder that courage and determination can change the course of history. However, his story also raises important questions. What is the price of freedom? What does it truly mean to lead? Is personal sacrifice an inevitable path to immortality? These reflections make Wallace not just a hero but a complex figure who continues to inspire discussions about leadership, resistance, and the power of one individual to inspire a nation. In the next chapter, We'll conclude this journey by exploring how Wallace's legacy remains relevant today, from popular culture to the universal ideals his struggle represents. William Wallace is not just a figure of the past. His story lives on, reminding us of the value of standing up for what we believe in. His legacy has evolved, adapting to the struggles and aspirations of every era. From his portrayal in films like Braveheart to his impact on social movements, Wallace remains a universal icon of resistance. In today's world, his figure represents far more than Scottish independence. His struggle has inspired leaders and movements seeking freedom in all its forms. In times of oppression, his sacrifice re-emerges as an example that even one person can make a difference. The word freedom associated with Wallace is not just a slogan, it's a promise. His life reminds us that freedom is not free, that it requires courage, sacrifice, and an unyielding will to confront injustice. But it also reminds us that this ideal transcends time and place, and that his fight belongs to all who value dignity and self-determination. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the life and legacy of William Wallace. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and share this video with your friends. Let us know in the comments, what do you think of Wallace? Was he a perfect hero, a symbol of his time, or something more? We'd love to hear your thoughts. See you in the next episode of Warriors of the World, where we'll continue exploring the lives of leaders and warriors who left their mark on history. Until the next adventure.